Andy Altman was CEO of the Olympic Park Legacy Company from 2009 to 2012. He was appointed by Chair Margaret Ford on the basis of his reputation for having delivered major regeneration projects in Philadelphia and in Washington. He's now principal of Five Squares Development Company back in DC. And over the last few months, the NLA has been looking at the huge amount of development that has taken place over the last 15 years as part of its Changing Face of London programme. The Olympics and its legacy has clearly played a key role in that story. So it's very interesting to hear some of Andy's recollections from that time. So Andy, you joined the organization 3 years before the Olympics. So
Yes.
at that stage, what were the key parts of your role?
Well, first of all, Peter, it's a pleasure. Thank you for remembering me and having me on the show. And hello to everyone who's listening. It's a great pleasure to be able to reflect a bit about what was truly one of the greatest opportunities in my professional career and one of the greatest experiences. So, always enjoyed all the venues that you provided for us during my tenure to share the vision for legacy. So yes, I came over to London in 2009, 3 years before Games. And, you know, what was brilliant about the way the Games were organized, the entire enterprise was, you know, the three companies, you know, the Olympic Delivery Authority and then the Legacy Company and of course, you know, the organizing committee. And the Legacy Company being set up 3 years before Games was really one of the only times that's ever been done in the history of Olympics, which is anticipating, you know, post-Games regeneration. So the mandate of the organization, and I was brought over, was to help with the chair, as you said, Margaret Ford, to build the organization, to come up with the strategy for, you know, the legacy, and to build the organization to implement that strategy. There obviously have been a lot of documents and plans in place, but it was to pull it all together with a coherent master plan, very clear business plan, budget, strategy. And then, as you know, Peter, the driving fear at that time was that, you know, that there could be white elephants, right? The fear of the sort of mantra of no white elephants from the experience of other Olympic parks, which had experienced that, whether you looked at what happened in Beijing or it took Sydney decades to have regeneration, of course, Athens, many other examples. No one had really gotten legacy right. And there was, first of all, make sure there are no white elephants, and that and then on the positively, which is create the platform for long-term regeneration.
So you left just almost as soon as the Games were over, and that was soon after Margaret Ford also left. Yeah. Had you planned to leave then, or did you want to go on for longer?
Well, you know, it's no, I had planned. It is one of those jobs you could be for a lifetime, right? I came over with a very specific focus, which was the building of the organization. And, you know, Peter, there are very distinct phases of legacy, right? One was the 2009 to 2012, sort of pre-Games, which is, I would call it in development terms, pre-development, which is, as I said, coming up with the business plan, the master plan, build the organization, securing the funds for what was called transformation, right? The rebuilding of the Olympic Park from Games to post-Games mode, getting all of that organized. Then there was the transformation period, right? From Game 2012 till 2014, 15, which is kind of the closure of the park, the rebuilding of the park, retrofitting of facilities, preparation of new infrastructure for redevelopment. And then there's legacy, which goes on, you know, for decades. Each of those are really distinct phases. So I came over very much focused on that first phase and the pre-development phase, and putting all of my energy and time into that. So it was a very natural break point, because otherwise I felt you had to have somebody there for transformation, which was another 2 years, and then someone ideally after that to be really the manager of the park and lead it to its next stage. So it was a very natural break point, and I felt it was a clear decision because you didn't want to leave midway between transformation. And so my family, we had decided that was a good point. We ended up staying in London, another year and a half, year or so. We loved London, and you don't just transition immediately from that, but it was the right point, the most responsible point in terms of the life of the organization.
So have you been following progress of the Development Corporation, and how do you think it's doing?
Well, I haven't followed the progress of the corporation. I mean, I go on the website quite a bit, but what I have has been a great pleasure is I was in London a couple of years ago, and I went out to the park and actually took my kids out to the park and spent a couple of days, and it was just tremendous to see it, Peter. I mean, it is such an enormous success, it seems to me. I mean, it is beautiful. The parks are striking. The neighborhoods there, just seeing people, enjoying living in the former, Olympic housing, seeing here east and the whole transformation of the broadcast center into a whole innovation center, seeing all the stadia, everything. I mean, it was really the waterways, and truly seeing the playgrounds. And just, one of the measures was, will people in East London, will people in this community be using the park? It won't feel like something separate from them, that it's just for tourists or just for outsiders, that it is genuinely of the community. And when I went to the playgrounds and you see that the diversity of the community that are using the playgrounds and using the park, it's a vibrant piece of city. And it was very, very gratifying, but importantly, I think a great tribute, to all of the UK. I mean, in terms of how they organized this, the Olympics to be truly achieve legacy and regeneration that I don't think you can point to another example that's as comprehensive and as successful. So no, it was extremely, and it keeps getting, as a piece of city should, it keeps maturing and evolving and getting better and better, and each piece builds on the other. Quite remarkable. I took hundreds of photos. It's fabulous.
I mean, it's interesting that at the moment in London, we're having a discussion about building better, building beautiful. And I can remember I was waiting for you to come back from a meeting with Boris Johnson. And when you arrived, you said something about Boris Johnson wants us to change the design approach from all these Ken Livingstone tall blocks into much lower, more traditional terraces. And I think it's very interesting that actually during Boris Johnson's tenure as mayor, with his London Mayor's Housing Design Guide, he actually did deliver a new London vernacular, which is now, you can see on the Olympic Park and actually all around London, which I never quite expected mayors to deliver a change in, might say, architectural style and delivery in quite that way.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Boris Johnson. Actually, here in my office, as you can see in the back, was something Boris gave me from for one of my birthdays in London from the Olympic Games post World War II, and signed by Boris. So yeah, he was quite an amazing person to work with. No, he was very interested in that, Peter, and he was very supportive. One of the first things we did and was to relook at, there had been a lot of master planning that had been done, obviously, but we looked at it, and Margaret Ford, very supportive of this, and we took a critical eye to this, and we're encouraged to do so. To step back, you've all come in new, not to say what's been done has not been good work, but take a fresh view of it. And we did, and one of the things we thought of is, how does this park reflect the amazing diversity of typologies in London, right, of housing and of the built environment? And one of the questions I used to get when I first arrived, was, oh, what's your vision for the park, and what's your vision for development, and how should we look? What should we look to? And from your experience, what should we, anticipate, and what do you think you'll be doing? And I said to them, to everyone, as you recall, I said, I'm not actually going to say anything for the first 6 months, because it's not for me to come and say, I have the model of how I did in Philadelphia or Washington or somewhere. Each city has its own, as Ricky Burdett would say, its own DNA, right? And the trick is to uncover that DNA of the city. And I learned so much from Ricky about that through Urban Age. And what you realize is just London has remarkable typology. So how do we make this of London, right? Londoners love London, right? Other cities look to London. I didn't have to go very far. So for me, it was wandering the streets, you know, going around Hackney, going around the canals, going around the great terraces, going around the beautiful parks and the Regent's Park, Hyde Park, Victoria Park. I mean, all these beautiful parks, and just understanding the relationship that Londoners have to their open spaces, and to the fact that you can have tremendous amount of density doesn't all have to be in high-rise blocks, that this misconception that density only comes in one form, which is what a lot of Ricky Burdett's work has shown, right, in terms of the density in London. So, and so you could have this mix of both high-rise and terraces centered around sequences of open spaces. I was really struck by that. And so we started to redo the master plan. And one of the things was to say that a lot of the master plan had been before a lot of just blocks, you know, because it was looking at how do you just look at it from a density perspective and how do you take each block of them. And we wanted to look at something that was a little more textured, a little more fine-grained, that had that kind of what makes the city so interesting and so successful urbanistically as well as socially and economically. And so, you know, Chobham Manor was the example of that, right? So you have the what had been the Olympic housing that's now, you know, all been converted to a neighborhood, you know, East Village, and then Chobham Manor could have different densities. So I could have different sort of typologies of mews homes, apartment blocks, etc. So you begin to get gradations, and that makes it and of course it's all centered around the parks, right? And so that was really important. And, you know, one of the people and so Boris was very encouraging that, Margaret Ford was very encouraging, the board was encouraging, and people really received it. I remember when we met with the different mayors of the boroughs, all were very excited about this idea of family housing on the park. And they felt that it really connected to them in a way that they understood what they loved about London. So it's really taking what you love about a place. I mean, just to give one other example, and then I'll stop, is, you know, the north part of the park, which was designed by George Hargraves, you know, was very big landforms, right? Land sculpting, very beautiful. The South Park around the stadium, around the aquatic center, you know, close to the kind of gateway in from Westfield, from the mall and from transport hub, you know, was going to be a kind of more active place, right? A bit more urban, more of a larger central square than the quieter, more natural Nord Park. And we had a chance to design that. We were very much encouraged to do that. And so we had the design competition, ended up having James Corner, who had designed the High Line in New York, do a design. And again, we looked to the history of London, and it was the pleasure gardens, right? Which had been a tremendous feature of London's open spaces and typologies of open space and public spaces and use of public space. And so we look back to that history. So a lot of it was drawing precedents and learnings from London and translating that in a modern sense to the Olympic Park.
So tell me a bit about Five Squares and what you're up to now.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, you know, there's never an easy transition, Peter, from London. I have to say, the years I was there were tremendous. One of the most dynamic cities I've ever been fortunate to live in, one of the most dynamic cities in the world. So it was not an easy transition. My family very much, there was a bit of a shock coming back to the United States, let alone, of course, the political revolution that happened. We had no idea we were coming back to that. Might not have left if we had known. But we came back to Washington, D.C., and that was really driven by really complete opportunity, Peter, and very personal. As my closest and oldest friend who I grew up with in Philadelphia was a real estate developer in Washington, had asked me to help him with a couple of projects. I thought I was helping out as you would with a friend, to consult a little bit. We end up winning these projects, and he's always been an entrepreneur. We were friends since we were 10 years old. As you may know, at 10 years old, I wanted to be a city planner, and he always wanted to be an entrepreneur. We kind of went our paths. I went on to planning school, and he went on to business school and successful career in real estate, and I went on to city planning and city building. And he said, well, let's start a company. And I thought, really? I'm a bit old to start a company. And he said, no, this is the chance to do it if we don't do it now. So really went from the scale of, planning cities, Washington, Philadelphia, we're looking at the whole city scale, the Olympic Park, those once in a generation opportunities, 600 acres to developing specific sites. But Five Squares was really founded, Peter, as a mission-oriented development, which means to take what I've learned, even at different scales, and translate that to development. And what I mean by that is that we're a small company, we're just a few people, entrepreneurial, and we partner with either nonprofit organizations or governments or educational institutions to help them figure out how to take their real estate and use it to achieve their mission, and as well as to do really good city building and really high quality design. So our first project, which we just completed last year, was with an organization in Washington, D.C., which is the leading LGBTQ organization here, that had an amazing site in a very vibrant corridor in Washington. They had been here in the bad years, the good years, and they now want to figure out how do they take this site and use it to achieve their goals, which is financial security for the organization, as well as to meet some of their needs. So we were selected and partnered with them and developed a beautiful mixed-use project. We had Annabelle Seldorf was our architect. It was fantastic architecture, as you know her work, hadn't done a multi-family rental building. And we created a beautiful mixed-use project that had ground floor retail, a cultural center for the community, 2 floors of, 1 floor for the organization Women Walker, 1 floor for the Goethe Institute, the German Cultural Institute, and 4 floors of residential. And we redesigned all of the public space. So there's public art, there's outdoor spaces for people just to sit, enjoy a day, create a sense of civic space. So those, again, you can work at different scales, but take the same ideas about city building. And so that's one of our signature projects. It's called Liz on 14th Street, L-I-Z, because Elizabeth Taylor had been a major donor to this organization at the height of the AIDS crisis epidemic. We're now on to building 2,000 units in partnership with the transport agency here, Metro, at a Metro stop. So doing transit-oriented sustainable development of 2,000 flats, which will be mixed income, adjacent to an arts center, a major regional arts center. So it's going to be very much an arts and culture-based community and mixed income community. And we're also partnering with Howard University, which is a very prominent university. Our vice president is a graduate of Howard University, and we're working on a major project right at their front door. Again, combination of public space, retail, residential, hotel, but all of these are, I think, centered around a public realm and a kind of mission-oriented purpose. So it's been a very different chapter. I think, Peter, in my life, I've had these different chapters of being, planner of a city to city builder, like at the Olympic Park, to now in the private sector as a real estate developer. But the themes and goals are all consistent.
Very interesting. Still working together with the public sector. And one of the things that has happened very much since you left is now that TfL is actually developing a lot of its sites around stations itself or in conjunction with development partners. So that has a strategy to deliver some 10,000 homes over the next few years. So that's along the same sort of line. So Andy, thank you very much for your time and for your insights, and look forward to seeing you sometime in the future.
Well, I hope to be back very soon. There seems to be optimism now, and one of our first stops is always to come back to London. I hope to be there in the next year and visit with you and see the park and see friends. And thank you always for being a great friend. And to all those out there, we miss London. It was one of the most amazing experiences for myself and my family, both professionally and personally, and a great achievement. And congratulations to everyone who was a part of that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the legacy you left London.